This is the eLearn Podcast, episode 87.
But it doesn't have to be an object from the 1800s. It can just be a little bit of a different design or a surprising statement, or perhaps one of those humorous graphics, that kind of thing. So you want to balance novelty with consistency. Consistency makes things harmonious, and novelty can kind of make things interesting.
Welcome to the eLearn Podcast. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. My guest for today is Connie Malamed, curator of the eLearningcoach.com, which she started way back in 2009. She's been in the visual, instructional, and learning design field for more than 20 years and has literally seen it all. In this insightful conversation, Connie and I discuss why visual design is so important in learning today, given the fact that so much data is transmitted visually in online learning. We also talk about why the two most important things to consider as a visual designer are your audience, as in who are they anyway, and context, as in where are they and what are they trying to learn. We also talk about why it's important to consider how humans cognitively process graphics and visual parts of learning. Your eyes are always moving, so we need to think about how to build a visual hierarchy that accounts for perception, processing, and remembering. We also talk about when and how we give something meaning. Is it working memory, long-term memory, and how we don't really know how this works anyway. Finally, we discuss why learning designers are not the same as graphic designers and how to avoid the biggest mistakes to design: clutter, forgetting visual hierarchy, and simply having too much, like fonts and colors. And the reason why you should never use a white background for a presentation in a large room. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning Podcast is sponsored by the eLearn Success Series, a uniquely valuable set of events that bring together sector experts and thought leaders to offer solutions to the most critical challenges and issues at the intersection of education and technology. Get your free ticket to all 4 sessions at elearnsuccessseries.com. And OpenLMS, a company that provides world-class LMS solutions that empower organizations to meet education and workplace learning needs. Learn more by visiting openlms.net.
Hello, Connie. How are you today? Welcome to the eLearn Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited because I know we're going to be talking about visual design.
Oh, you've stolen my thunder, but it's fantastic. Now, you are a visual design expert. You are the eLearningcoach.com. I mean, you're the force behind the eLearningcoach.com. But, I've taken the time to tee you up and talk about you a little bit in the introduction, talk about our bullet points about what we talk about here. But I always like to have, well, first, where are you sitting? Where am I talking with you today? Uh-oh.
I'm in Maryland, maybe about an hour from DC.
Oh, about an hour from DC. All right. I think we had just a little bit of a hiccup in the Zoom universe there, but no worries at all. I love the DC. I lived in the DC area for 5 years, and you're about to enter my favorite time, which is the springtime, which is fantastic. We're recording this just in the middle of February here, 2022. Excellent. Why don't you take, and as I was going to say before, I love giving my guests the opportunity to take, those 2 minutes. Just why don't you put yourself on the table? Tell us about who you are, where you came from, and what you do.
How high is the table? Because I'm going to have to think about that. Kind of short. Okay. My name's Connie Malamed, and I've been in the field for over 20 years of instructional design, learning experience design. I think I started writing in a blog, the eLearning Coach, in 2009, because when I got out of graduate school, I noticed, and it has changed, that a lot of people didn't really know about cognitive psychology and some of the processes and models that I had learned in graduate school, because I think I was the first person to get a degree in it. So I started writing articles about what I had learned in graduate school. And then I began researching on my own. And then one thing led to another, and it kind of snowballed. I am still writing that on that site. There are over 350 articles. I just can't stop.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to hear what the latest information are. As you said, you are psyched that this conversation is going to be about visual design. So break that out for me. Why is visual design important and an important component, or is it the component of learning design? Where does it sit? Why is it important?
I would not say it is the component, because I've seen some nice text-based approaches to learning that can also work. But one of the reasons it's just so important is because a lot of people are using e-learning and multimedia, slide presentations, and visuals are, for individuals who are sighted, it's the most prominent sense we have. We have millions of neurons perceiving and processing visual information every second. So it's just a powerful way to communicate to sighted individuals.
Nice. What are some of the, critical challenges, or I don't want to say mistakes, but the common things that you find yourself coaching people and saying, look, try doing it this way, or maybe think about this, or one or two things that you would immediately recommend to everyone to think about?
It's very close to what we think about when we're performing pure instruction design. We have to think about the audience, and we have to think about the context. So for the audience, their age, in terms of, are we talking about visual design for children? Or are we talking about visual design for adults? Are we talking about people who are visually literate, as most of the people that we create for? Or are we talking about people who may come from a culture where what we think is okay to do, like a thumbs up sign, is actually going to be an insult in some other culture? So I was pretty disappointed to find that out, because I like that icon.
Yeah, me too.
But anyway, so thinking about the audience is just so important. And then the context, where are they going to be using this? It's just something quick. Do we just need to make a quick icon as they're flipping through their phone to figure something out? Or it's just like a relaxed kind of kickback kind of video? Or is it an e-learning course, which people may not feel like taking, some kind of compliance course? So we have to think about all of those things as part of our design.
As we're thinking about those components, I know that one of the things that you, as you said right in the beginning there, cognitive psychology, or the cognitive science behind, graphics and whatnot. What is important about how we process graphics, like how we take in visual representation and whatnot, that I should be considering as a learning designer?
That's a good question. Some of the things are that what we intend for people to understand, they don't necessarily always understand. So it's a really good idea to run what we're creating by a few people and say, does this make sense to you? Like, let's say you're making a diagram of a process. Can you understand this process? Asking a few other people, ideally sample audience members. So we have to think about whether someone is actually going to understand what we've created. Is it going to perhaps touch their emotions if we want to in a photograph, that kind of thing? Just in the same way that we would for a story. I forget what the question was.
How we process graphics, right?
Right. Okay. So first I got a little off track because of the intention, but that's really important. But how we process it, yeah, that's a whole other really amazing things. Our eyes are constantly moving in saccade. I think it's about 3 a second. Or is that our eyes are constantly moving, and we really only see a small part of a graphic without moving our eyes. We don't have to move our head, but our eyes are like scanning all the time, just scanning the environment. And that's the same for a graphic. So we have to think in terms of directing the eyes, and what do we want people to notice first, second, and third, and that's called building a visual hierarchy. And when we take in that graphical information, we're bringing it into sensory memory, and sensory memory is really short. So we're only going to pick up a few key things. And that's why we have to think about, what do we want people to notice first? And after that, it goes into working memory. And I think by now, most people do know that working memory is where we manipulate information, and where it's essentially like being online. And that only lasts a short time, maybe 10 seconds. And unless we use that information or rehearse it, we kind of forget what's happening in working memory. some of that information, if we can connect it to our network of knowledge, gets stored in long-term memory. Just so much of it just dissipates. So we're thinking about all that when we're creating a graphic. We have to think about how people are perceiving it, and then how people are going to process it, and whether they're going to remember it. What can we do to help them remember it, if it is something that they need to remember? If we're just trying to touch the emotions, they probably don't need to remember it. But here's something interesting. We can remember thousands of images. We have they've done these experiments where they show people thousands of images and then test them again 3 days later, a few months later. And of course, there's memory decay, but we really can remember lots of images. And that's why if anyone who's listening or watching knows what a photo album is, before digital albums.
Back in the day.
And back in the day, and you flip through them and you can still remember some of those images. It's just amazing, from a really, really long time ago. And we just have a very, very strong visual memory. So that's another thing. We want to leverage it. So we've got the processing and the retention, and anything we can do to improve that and leverage the human's natural abilities is what we should do in our e-learning or in our slide presentations or in our any kind of graphics.
Is working memory where we give meaning to something?
Well,
where was that? Like, I'm kind of wondering, because you said, we look at a graphic and then it comes into sensory. And so, okay, I'm recognizing that I'm looking at an image and maybe I have some kind of emotional reaction to it. But then I'm just wondering, at what point do we say, okay, this is useful, not useful, this is powerful for me, this is shifting do you know where that happens?
It does happen in working memory, but not working memory alone. As soon as we see something, because our brains are always looking for meaning, we're wired to find meaning. We bring up related information from long-term memory. Of course, this is completely theoretical. This is what they think happens, because you can't see this happening. But we bring up information from long-term memory, and that's what gives it meaning. So
it's like a comparative process?
Well, it's like a quick scan. Like if I look at your image and I see a sign, or let's say I see a little bit of your microphone in this frame, I had to bring up from working memory that was a mic. So if I'd never seen a microphone, and the top of it looks kind of weird, it looks a little bit like futuristic or from another world. If I'd never seen a microphone, I'd be sitting here thinking the whole time, what is that? Is that a hat? Is that? And you're scanning long-term memory. And it's really fun. When I teach visual design, I show people something, an invention that they've never seen before. And I ask people, I say, watch what you're doing mentally. And people are scanning their long-term memories. I mean, of course, it's happening in nanoseconds and we can't really watch it, but you kind of can. And they say, like, that looks like a fire alarm. That looks like a smoke alarm. That looks like, this or that. And they're always wrong, because it's an object that no one knows about. And I'm not going to tell you what it is in case you end up in one of my classes.
Do you ever pull stuff from like long ago, get like some patents from like the 1800s, like, before electricity, and just say, hey, what do you think this was used for? Because that would be cool.
That would be cool. I kind of had that experience when I did an escape room with a bunch of 14-year-old girls. And it was they were in a room with old technology, and none of them even knew what a floppy disk was or anything. And it was so much fun showing them these things. You know what? They loved it. They loved the dial phone. They loved all that older technology. I don't know why. Maybe it was just interesting. But I had to tell them what all of these objects were. This is a floppy disk, and that's why your save icon still may have a floppy disk on it. And they went, oh, it's really fun. So I like your 1800s idea, and I think I'll do that next.
Well, that kind of leads me to another question then. How important or not is novelty, or is that just another kind of tool in the toolbox as when we're creating visual design, about what, indicating to the learner what is important?
I think novelty. I think research shows that novelty is pretty important. If you're going along, you have a few slides, you want it to be consistent, but then all of a sudden, that people are going to be falling asleep any minute. So then you throw in some novelty there, and it wakes them up, gets their attention. But it doesn't have to be an object from the 1800s. It can just be a little bit of a different design or a surprising statement, or perhaps one of those humorous graphics, that kind of thing. So you want to balance novelty with consistency. Consistency makes things harmonious, and novelty can kind of make things interesting.
What would you then, so is there a different way to approach the visual design aspects of a learning component or a piece, given either that it's live, it's going to be presented synchronously versus asynchronously? Like what are your recommendations there?
There are recommendations for being in a large room. For example, a white background can start to shimmer in a presentation shown in a very large room. One time I had the embarrassing experience of presenting to a group of excellent information graphic artists, and every one of their presentations had a black background. I was the only one that had one with a white background. And then, this was years ago. And then I asked them, why did you do that? And they told me about the shimmer. So I was, humiliated, but it's okay. So that's a regular occurrence. So no big deal. So from then on, in a big room, I always made a dark gray or dark blue or dark black environment. Okay, so there's those kinds of things. As far as the visual design goes, yeah, I do think we have to think about that. The computer screen is close, so you might be able to put in more detail. From far away, you may need you want big objects with impact, that kind of thing. So you're not going to do a whole lot of little bits of text and things from when people are at a distance. So I do think that's part of the context of what you're designing. I think we really do have to think about that.
So what are, as we've now entered the new normal, the normal of remote work, the normal of distance learning, or, there's always going to be a hybrid that we expect. What are you finding for, the learning and development designer or the professor at the university? What are your, immediate sort of, hey, look, here are the 5 things that you need to do in your presentations or your learning design now, now that this is just the expectation?
I mean, designing for online, that just hasn't changed. And I don't think if people are using the same design for online and for a large, lecture hall presentation, I don't think they can do that. I think they may have to change things around, or maybe they can find some happy middle ground. But when we're designing for online, like I said, I think we can make things a little bit smaller. The font can be smaller. We can add a little more detail that people will notice. So I don't think that's really changed. So maybe I'm missing the point of your question.
I guess for me, I'm trying to tease out where do you see the usual challenges? Like when somebody comes to the e-learning coach, or, you're working with either a client or with other staff members or whatever, like what are the usual 3 to 5 mistakes that people make? And how do we not, and what's your counsel to rectify them?
Right. Okay. That I can answer. Probably the biggest mistake is clutter.
Oh, okay.
People, we try to be kind of clever. We're not graphic designers, we're visual designers. And I differentiate between those two. So graphic designers who do this 40 to 60 hours a week, professional graphic designers, don't even try to compare yourself with them. They're going to make the most outrageous, cool, awesome stuff ever. However, they're doing this for marketing. Often they're doing it perhaps for, a concert poster. It's often very different than what we're doing, because we're designing to help people learn new skills, acquire information, retain this information. And that is, sad to say, we just can't always be as clever as a graphic designer is going to be. So instead of being clever and adding all this cool, wild stuff and psychedelic lettering, really what we're doing is it's kind of plain. I remember a friend asking me, would I help her with her slide design? And she had all this cool stuff in the background and everything. And I sent her a design with a flat color, like 3 different colors in the background. And she said, this is it? This is what you're giving me? And then she gave her presentation. She said, I get it, and I felt bad. Sure, you can put something slightly faded in the background, but generally I want people to notice what I want them to notice, and extra stuff in the background may distract them. Not always. And no rule is 100%, but there's that clutter problem that people are trying to be too clever and too design-y, design-ish.
I want to emphasize this point because I think that you've come at it from you said something a few seconds ago. And I really love the comparison between a graphic designer and someone who's designing learning, because I think that is one of the big fears that we've heard, at least here on the podcast, but also in the events that we hold as well, as, learning professionals saying, oh no, how am I going to create these visually rich things that are going to compete with TikTok and right. Instagram Reels and all the other cool stuff you see on YouTube and whatnot. And it's really kind of refreshing to hear you say, look, there is a place for entertainment. There's a place for product design. There's a place for marketing. This is learning. And so let's be very clear and reasonable about what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. And every rule is meant to be broken. You'll see some really cool things in learning, and they will get people's attention. And maybe it's like at the start or something, or maybe a really cool visualization or animation that's really fun, and a talented person made it. But then we get back to basics again, so we can mix it up a little. But I doubt if you're going to make something TikTok-ish for 20 minutes and have people learn from it. I mean, maybe, there's always
the exception. Yeah.
There's always the exception. Like, for example, I usually say stick to 1 or 2 fonts, typefaces. And I saw like a fantastic poster that had about 50 of them, and it was great. It's a beautiful poster. So, you don't have to stick to every rule, but generally speaking, it's a little disappointing that we have to be kind of plain,
Yeah. Well, when I teach, sorry. When I teach my class, I have the most boring slides ever, and it works really well. So I literally, I'm just not, I don't have any visuals. Just tell, here's the points that we're going to talk about. But, okay. So no, clutter is problem number 1. What's the second one?
It may be not thinking about visual hierarchy, because I don't think that's an everyday word for instructional designers. So the visual hierarchy is the way to guide a person's eyes, to direct the eyes through your composition, your slide. And you are saying what's most important. That's the focal point. What is at the secondary level, maybe the third level. And graphic designers are so used to thinking in this way that it's second nature, and it can become second nature to instructional designers, learning designers too, because you start to think as you're designing, real quick, what's my focal point? What do I want people to see? I want them to see the text, or do I want them to see the graphic first? Do I want them to see the title first so that they'll understand this complex, graph? Or do I want them to see the graph first? So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about in visual hierarchy. And there are a lot of rules of thumb for creating a visual hierarchy. For example, because we read from left to right in Western languages and from top to bottom, what we want to be, what we put at the top and in the top left is going to be most important. People are going to notice that first. However, if it's a giant graphic like they have, if you want to see some good visual design, you can often go to Apple's site and see like really their latest product is really large, and that's what you're going to notice first. So if we make something large, people are going to notice it first. Positioning, top and upper left, bright colors, people are going to notice first. You often images over text, but they might compete a little bit. If the title's at the top, but your image is down there. Anything moving, people will notice first. So on weather.com, they've got all these moving things, and it's like, stop. And that's
note to the designers of weather.com, cut it out.
Or else.
Yeah.
So, we don't do stroby things anymore, but that used to be a thing, that to get people to notice something. So those are like 5 things that people will notice. And that's the way to start creating your visual hierarchy. You can have a typographic hierarchy. You can have a page of text, and we do it naturally. We make a heading. People are going to notice that first. top. A subheading, people are going to notice that next. And body text or paragraph text, people are going to notice that next.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our typographic hierarchy, which is part of your visual hierarchy.
Fantastic. Is there any no-nos in terms of hierarchy? I'm just thinking, is there like color schemes? I'm just thinking, somebody who will use something completely super radical, neon colors or something like that, or other things that you would counsel against?
I think if you notice your audience members putting on sunglasses, tone it down a little.
Yeah, for sure.
I think just the normal rules, try to not have things compete. So if you want them to look at your graphic first, you want to make that bright. So don't make a big graphic and then bright text, because they're going to compete. Just notice what your eyes are looking at next time. They have those heat maps for where people look first on the screen. That research is really interesting, but notice it in yourself. You may find yourself text or graphic. You may find yourself not sure where to look. And I'm not saying this is easy. It's not necessarily always easy. All we can do is try our best.
Sure. Do you have a third one?
Yeah. But I'm trying to think of which one I want to say.
Well, then you have third and fourth. Who cares? Yeah, hit them for me.
Maybe another common error would be maybe too many colors or too many fonts. It is kind of interesting that when I choose a palette, I really am picking like a main color or two, an accent color, which is going to be perhaps opposite on the color wheel. So blue versus orange, or maybe a yellow. So we pick like one or two kind of mellow colors for people to, as part of your color palette, maybe a bright color for highlights, and one or two neutral colors. And so everything that we do can be like pretty simple. 3 to 5 colors in your palette. One typeface with lots of different styles can work. It might have a fat, which is heavier than bold. It may have, it's going to have italics. It's going to have, a nice regular. It may have a semi-bold. You can find these fonts that have these font sets, and maybe that's all we do, because it's really hard to pair fonts. That takes extra skill. If you want to have 2 fonts, then you have one with serif and one with sans serif, that kind of thing. So just everything can be simple, and your designs will probably look better as a result of it.
So what's the fourth one then?
Oh boy, I was hoping you wouldn't ask. Let me think. I mean, I have a lot of them, but in terms of like those 3 are high priority. Keeping things simple with your palette and your fonts. Maybe just figuring out a way to clarify the complexity. We really do teach a lot of complex concepts. We're not teaching, unless you're working in primary education, we have a lot of complexity to get across. So maybe a really good one is to reduce the text and try to visualize as much as you can, or take your abstract concepts and try to find ways to make them concrete through visual analogies or through metaphors, or just simply through an abstract graphic. We can often take, let's say, data or statistics and put it into a graph. People can understand bar graphs. That's what they understand best of all. Well, maybe they understand pie graphs, but people use them incorrectly. So that's why I'm not mentioning pie graphs.
Give me a reason why. Give me a reason why people use pie graphs incorrectly. That
is kind of intriguing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
so these professional visual journalists, information graphic artists, data visualizers, you will find that they often avoid pie graphs. So a pie graph is meant to show a part of something to a whole. So the relationship between parts and whole. And unless you have only 2 or 3 slices of that pie, it begins to get difficult for people to actually grasp a curved area. We just can't do it. We can't really tell the difference. So then you have to put in your numbers there, and if you're putting in your numbers, you might as well just make a bar graph, because we can really tell when something is higher or lower.
Sure,
on a
that
bar
makes
graph.
sense.
A-
Yeah.
And the same with a horizontal bar graph. We can really tell what's longer and shorter. It's much more difficult in a pie graph. So
Mhm.
now I kind of don't use them, even though I kind of like them.
Yeah.
It's humiliating. Once I know, I can't keep using them. I did interview a data visualizer once, and he said, it's okay. Just don't use a lot of slices in your pie.
Mm. I feel like there's a metaphor there that I'm it's right on the. I need a, I'm not witty enough in this moment in time to run with that.
It does get you in the mood for pizza when you really start thinking about it.
Oh man, I haven't had pizza in a while. That sounds like a great idea. Connie, what else am I not asking you about visual design that you think is incredibly important to that we need to put on the table here?
Okay, well, let's see. I may have told you everything I know, but let me just think for a moment. Did we cover my 3 questions?
Yeah, we did. But I guess my question is I guess my question is like, what's the interesting thing for me is we're not going to be changing as humans anytime soon. And so is visual design something that is a knowable, finite set of things, or as we're moving now here, we're in February 2022. Are you expecting or seeing, like, for instance, will virtual augmented reality, is that changing how we consider design, or do the principles, like, is there a finite set of principles that we can work with here?
That is a great question. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I like to tell people this. This is my maternal side. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you can learn visual design. It is different than becoming a great artist. You do not have to render. You do not have to draw well to be a visual designer. And I know professional graphic designers who cannot draw. The drawing people are the illustrators. And there's quite a few graphic designers who cannot. They can create a great composition. They can't render very well. So that's one thing. So everyone who's listening can learn the principles of visual design and continue to improve. Another really important thing is to never compare yourself with a professional graphic designer. If you did this 40 to 60 hours a week, you would be amazing too in a couple of years. But you're not. You're thinking about instructional design and about authoring tools and about learning management systems. Mm-hmm. So you probably aren't going to be doing this, full time. So what people should do is compare their work with their previous work. Keep working on it for about 3, 4, 5, 6 months, then go back and look at your other work, and you'll see that you have improved. So there are general principles to learn, and we talked about some of them: visual hierarchy, being consistent with harmony, all of those. And go easy on yourself. Don't get disappointed. You will improve.
Fantastic.
That's how I'd like to end things.
Well, I have one last question I ask everybody here on the podcast, which is, what are you excited about? As someone who's been doing this, you started writing your blog in you said 2006, right? 2009, 2006. You've been around the block, you've seen it all, you've done it, but here we are in 2022. We've gone through the great transformation. We're in the new normal. As you look down, the next year, is there something that you're excited about? Is there something that you're like, wow, this is cool, this is the change that I want, or steady as she goes?
I mean, I'm just excited about all of it. I feel that people are getting better. The research about cognitive science, about how people learn, is getting widely disseminated. I do a lot of teaching now, and I learn from students like crazy, just like I'm sure you do too. Everyone says that who teaches. You learn so much. It's a pretty even exchange. But I'm just excited about, I think things are getting better. I think people are learning about user experience design, user interface design, visual design. We're really, in cognitive science, we're really capturing it all and getting better and better at learning design. And I just find it all exciting. The technologies, all of it. I'm psyched.
Yeah, me too. Actually, Connie Malamed, you are the e-learning coach behind the eLearningCoach.com. You've been out forever, a true expert in your field. I can't thank you enough for being on the show today and sharing your expertise. And I hope that we will see you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the eLearning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to eLearningSuccessSummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about eLearning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.